Hey friends, my name is Kat and welcome to my channel, Boss Babe DIY. On today's episode, I'm going to show you how I painted my entire kitchen for less than $500 while keeping it looking super professional. Now, for those of you who are new to my channel, my husband and I bought a 1930s stone cottage just over a year ago, and we spent about an entire year getting it renovated for us to move in. Now, a lot of those renovations we hired out just because there was foundational work and plumbing and electrical and things that we just couldn't do ourselves. But to save on certain costs, we decided to do some of the DIYs ourselves. So this was one of those things that I decided I had never done before, but I figured I could tackle it. So I wanted to show you some of the tips and tricks that I learned along the way.
As you can see, we've got quite a number of cabinets going on here between our kitchen and our wet bar area. We found all of these cabinets at a salvage store in town to save on some costs, and then we're going to get them painted, but that quote was pretty steep for what we were looking for, so I decided to learn a new skill and paint these myself. The very first thing I did before starting my prep work was to label all of my doors and drawers using a number and letter system I came up with myself. This helps when it comes time to reinstall all of my doors and drawers because they are pre-fitted to their specific cabinet bases. I want to make sure that everything goes back exactly where it was before instead of playing that annoying guessing game with 22 different cabinets. Another thing you'll see me doing here is attaching all of the door hardware to the actual doors with painter's tape as well. This isn't necessarily something you need to do since all of this hardware is exactly the same, but I wanted to be very particular about saving all of my pieces of hardware to match all of my doors. I feel like the worst thing you can have happen is to lose that last screw when you are almost done with your process. So it's entirely up to you, but that's what worked for me. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when I was painting these cabinets was before we had power and heat in the house, which is why I've got a headlamp and a jacket and a beanie on for most of this. It does shift about halfway through this video, so you know, we make the best of our circumstances.
So you can see they've left a space here for where the stove is going to go. It has been back ordered for 8 months, but I think it's finally on its way. So instead of just putting spacers here next to the oven, they decided to build out a couple little cabinet spaces for like sheet pans, things like that. And it's a great idea. The execution is not so hot, so I'm just gonna rebuild these really quick.
So you can see right away why I decided to rebuild these. The cuts aren't particularly straight, and if I measure between this cabinet and the one to the right, none of the measurements are equal, and my oven that I ordered would never fit as it stands. Yeah, you can see just how out of square they are right here. Luckily, since these cabinets were so poorly constructed, they were really easy to take apart. The side panels were still in really good shape, so all I really had to do was cut down new face pieces and a new bottom for each of my cabinets. Okay, so this is not at all how I normally construct cabinets. I was tacking something onto the end of it, trying to use the pieces I already had. So if it looks like I'm struggling and it's really awkward, that's because it was. Oh yeah, huge improvement. Eventually I'll be putting doors on these as well, but that's for a later video. Now that my cabinets are all good to go, I'm filling in any holes, nicks, or dings with some wood filler. I'll have all the products I used in this video linked in the description box below. I let my wood filler set overnight and then came back the next morning to do prep work. This is an incredibly important part of this process. First, to make sure that your cabinets have a really professional looking finish, and second, to make sure that your paint adheres exactly the way you want it to. So I started by sanding everything down with a 120 grit, and then I went back with a 220 grit just to smooth out all of my surfaces. After that, I vacuumed up any big debris and then went back over the cabinets with a tack cloth to pick up bigger dust particles, and then finally I used a damp rag to get those last little particles to make sure that everything was nice and clean and ready for me to prime. Lastly, I wanted to make sure to protect my beautiful original hardwood floors that had just been sanded, so I laid down some craft paper and painter's tape. Okay, now that all the prep work is done, it's time to prime these cabinets. Since I'm starting with a raw wood, I wanted to use a really hefty primer that has shellac in it so it really seals in all of the tannins. I've had the problem before where I've just used a normal primer on raw wood and then I've painted white over top of it, and over time you start to see some yellowing come through that paint. So I like to use, clearly I've used it before, Zinsser Bins shellac-based primer. This is really great. Like I said, it has shellac in it, so it seals all of those tannins into the wood while it also primes and preps for paint. I will go ahead and warn you though, if you are using this, it is pungent, so I would suggest wearing a mask or working in a well-ventilated area. The technique I'm using to paint the base cabinets is very straightforward. You don't have to have any fancy equipment. I start by painting all of the corners and edges with a good quality paintbrush. I really love this square brush from Zibra. I've used it on a bunch of my projects before. It's awesome for cutting in to those little corners. And then before that paint dries, I go back and smooth everything out with a foam roller. You may be wondering why I'm not spraying these base cabinets, and I promise I will explain in just a moment.
Now that I've got one coat of primer on all of the cabinets, I'm gonna go back and go over everything with a 320 grit sandpaper. This will just take out any little imperfections and give it that really smooth finish that we're looking for in our cabinet finish. I could have taped off everything and sprayed it for a little bit more of a factory finish, but I'm on a little bit of a time crunch, and honestly, this way works pretty well. So I will be sanding in between this coat and the second coat of primer, as well as my coats of paint.
I know this is just another one of those tedious steps. Believe me, I am not a big fan of sanding, but trust me when I tell you, this is one of those things that is just going to give those cabinets that extra clean finish. To get into those little corners, I'm using this micro tool from Gator. I got this thing last year, and I have to tell you, I use this on so many projects. It's really great for getting in those little details, and it's super affordable.
All of the cabinets now have 2 coats of primer, they've been sanded down, and we are ready for our cabinet paint. For this, I'm going to be using Behr's Urethane Alkyd Satin Enamel. You can also find this in semi-gloss. This paint is made specifically for cabinetry, doors, trim, places that get high traffic. It is self-leveling, it dries really, really hard, it acts like an oil-based paint while being a water-based paint, so the odor is not as bad and you can still clean and use your brushes. And it's stain resistant and water resistant, so this is perfect for the kitchen. If I spill something on the cabinets, I can easily clean it up with soap and water, and this will give me the smoothest factory finish look on my cabinet. So let's get painting.
This is always the most exciting part. Look at this green. It's so rich, so bold, so beautiful, which is exactly what we were doing in the house with the design. We decided to do everything very Art Deco in the house, so we wanted something super, super bold on the cabinets, and our countertops that are going to be going in will match this perfectly. As you can see, I'm using the same method that I did for the primer, where I paint all of my details with a brush and then roll everything out with a foam roller.
So I am actually very pleasantly surprised by how well this paint has gone on. I thought I would have to sand between coats of paint, but they weren't kidding about the self-leveling properties of this paint. It's gone on, this is 2 coats and it's already gone on so smooth. I've got to do 1 more coat, but I really think this finish is going to look really great without having to do any sanding in between. So good on you, Behr. All right, now that my cabinet bases are completely painted and done, I'm moving on to my mini doors and drawers. Now the prep work on this is going to look fairly similar. I'll be sanding it down with 220, priming, sanding, and then painting. However, I'm going to be spraying these instead of rolling them. And that's for two reasons. The first is going through and painting all of these by hand would take a really long time. The second is that a sprayer will give you an even smoother look than rolling with the foam roller. And since the doors and drawers are going to be a lot more prevalent on the cabinets than the actual bases themselves, I wanted to get these looking really, really nice and smooth. I'm going to be using an HVLP paint sprayer that will hook up to my air compressor for this.
I'm taping off all of my drawers with this pre-taped plastic. This is my first time using it, and it is a game changer. So it's already got tape on it, the plastic is folded up, so all I have to do is line it up along the edge of the drawer, fold down the plastic, and I'm good to go. Okay, so on this first run, I admittedly placed them way too close together, so I had to do a lot of reaching. I fixed this and ended up having to do these in several batches going forward. And just like my base cabinets, I sanded with a 320 grit sandpaper between each coat of primer. I did end up having to water down my paint just a little bit for it to feed properly through my HVLP sprayer. I think it was maybe a ratio of 1 part water to 4 parts paint, but I kind of had to play around with it and test it before I used it on my actual drawers. If you're doing this at home, every paint's going to be a little bit different and every sprayer is going to act a little bit differently as well, so make sure that you are testing on scrap wood before you start on your piece. So a couple things to keep in mind if you are spraying something at home is you want to start with thin coats. You can always add coats later, but it's going to take a lot longer to dry. Admittedly, I went a little bit thicker on a couple of my doors and drawers just because of timing. You'll also want to make sure that your movement is really consistent all the way across and that your paint overlaps the last layer of paint by just a little bit. That'll get you the most consistent look. And this paint actually dries really quickly, so I only had to wait about 45 minutes to an hour between coats of paint.
Okay, something I have just learned in real time. If you're painting over a longer period of time, I would suggest not using a plastic drop cloth because the primer that was on there has now dried, and so when I went to spray the doors that are very close to the ground, that primer just flaked away and got all into my paint. So I'm gonna try to sand this down and see if I can salvage the doors. Thankfully it's on the back so it won't be as noticeable. So, lesson learned.
I'll admit this was a really frustrating step in the process, having to go back over work I had already done. But that's the nature of DIY. You know, I'm learning new things in real time, and sometimes things don't work the way I think they're going to work, and I have to learn my lesson the hard way. For me, the key is always to take a breath and take a step back and realize that there's usually going to be a way to fix things, even if, yes, you do have to start over or redo some of your work. Thankfully, this ended up being a really easy fix. I found this plastic-lined paper drop cloth at Home Depot, which allowed my paint to soak in and not flake away like it did on the plastic. And once everything was sanded down, I put another coat of paint on and you can't even tell that there was an issue. Thankfully, I had no more issues moving forward and I was able to knock these things out. It did take me about a week to get everything done. That was just the nature of my schedule, but also having to do all of these in smaller batches and then having to let them cure over a certain amount of time. There are a lot of different types of paint sprayers out there. There's a lot of airless ones nowadays where you just hook it up to electricity and you can use it from there. I happen to have an air compressor, so I decided to go with an HVLP sprayer for a couple of reasons. One, I already had the air compressor, so buying this kit was just going to be a lot more cost effective for me. The other nice thing is the kit that I got came with 2 sprayers. So since I'm doing a huge project like this, it doesn't really make sense for me to prime everything and then paint everything. So I'm doing them in batches, I'm priming, and then all I have to do is change out my little paint unit at the hose, and then I can switch back and forth really easily. The other thing I like about these is that they're gravity fed. A lot of sprayers will pull up from a canister on the bottom, and sometimes that gets a little tricky when you're spraying at weird angles. And since I'm spraying on the floor, I wanted to make sure that I had an even flow going. So gravity fed sprayers are really great for that. It's also great because I can adjust the size of the spray and how much air is going out of it. So this was a great option for me. Like I said, there are a bunch of other options out there, but I'll have this one linked in the description below if you're interested at all. These nifty little things are called artist triangles. I highly suggest getting a couple of sets. You can get them at Home Depot. I'll link them below. And they basically lift your project off of the flat surface so it doesn't get stuck, but also has a minimal point of contact with it.
All right, so it took me a few days to get all of the batches done, mainly because this paint took a while to dry between coats and I wanted to make sure it was fully cured before I started handling these things. But all of my doors and drawers are on now, and so it is time to attach my hardware. Now, I've obviously got a theme going on here, so I'm going to be going with this brass hardware. I love how vintage it looks. So these poles will be going on all of my drawers, and then all of these little knobs will be going on my doors right here.
There are all sorts of fancy jigs out there for attaching door and drawer hardware. I just found this super simple one at Home Depot on the knob aisle. And here is the final look. I am absolutely obsessed with how this paint color turned out in the room. I think the bold pop of color looks really, really great with our dark countertops and light walls and all of our gold fixtures. As you can see, our stove finally came in, and I think it looks so good against the grain. I also filmed these final shots a few months after I originally painted it, so you can see how well the paint is still holding up, and we use our kitchen every single day. When it gets messy, all we have to do is wipe it down with a damp rag and everything comes off great. You would never know that I painted these myself. Now, the grand total for this makeover, not including the tools I already owned, like my sander and my air compressor, came out to be $494.56. Considering the cheapest estimate we got for painting these cabinets was $2,500 more than this, I'd say this was absolutely worth all of the time and effort.
Thank you so much for watching today's video, guys. I hope some of these tips were helpful for you if you're looking to paint some cabinets yourself. Let me know what you think of my full makeover in the comment section below. Would you have gone with these bold colors? Let me know what you think. Also, if you're not already, go ahead and subscribe. I've got a lot more projects that I've already worked on in this house that I've got videos on coming out very soon. And if you haven't, follow me over on Instagram. I do a lot of in-process videos over there as well. So until next time, I'll see you guys later. Are you helping? Are you helping? You're helping, huh? Yes. Ah. Oh, you're stuck.